Where's Vice President Kamala Harris? Our White House journalists are trying to run down exactly when she might want to concede this race and when exactly the public who voted for her and the rest of the nation, she is still the vice president, might want to hear from her. Like, when is that going to happen? I'm Harris Faulkner. You are in the Faulkner Focus. Trump will become just the second president in the United States history to be elected in non-consecutive terms. He will not only carry the Electoral College, but he could be the first Republican in 2 decades to win the popular vote. Votes are still being counted in some areas. And you know how we roll here. We wait for all the facts to come in. And the fact is, he's the 47th president. Trump greeted his supporters in the early morning with this message.
With friends and campaign staff.
This was, I believe, the greatest political movement of all time. We're going to fix everything about our country, and I will not rest until we have delivered the strong, safe, and prosperous America that our children deserve and that you deserve. This will truly be the golden age of America. Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason. And that reason was to save our country and to restore America to greatness.
Spared and ready to go. Trump has won the battleground states, North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. We are waiting again for final calls now still in Michigan, Arizona, and Nevada. One of last night's major themes was Donald Trump gaining with critical voting groups. Fox News voter analysis found Trump made strong gains with Hispanic, Black, and young voters, those younger than the age of 30. Just a sample of headlines here. Donald Trump's historic win paves the way for a new golden age, and Trump wins the election and a second chance. Meanwhile, at Kamala Harris headquarters, supporters began to leave. They were leaving her election party last night. She didn't show up. Trump's impending win became more and more obvious. Kamala Harris's campaign co-chair had a disappointing update for people who supported her and stayed.
We will continue overnight to fight to make sure that every vote is counted, that every voice has spoken. So you won't hear from the vice president tonight, but you will hear from her tomorrow. She will be back here tomorrow to address not only the HU family, not only to address her supporters, but to address the nation.
And we are still working with our White House journalists to actually confirm what her schedule will be today. So you may hear some things, but we want to really confirm it. The Democrat blame game had really begun before the loss.
One of the things that are top of mind is the choice of Tim Walz as the vice presidential candidate. A lot of people are saying tonight that it should have been Josh Shapiro. Frankly, people have been saying that for months. That would have signaled to the American people that she is not the San Francisco liberal that Trump said she was. But she went with someone actually to her left, Minnesota. So we'll see. I hate to say this, but I'm not sure how much Tim Walz contributed to the ticket.
Bill Malugin is in West Palm Beach, Florida. Bill.
Harris, good morning to you. The Trump campaign tells Fox News they're still waiting for a phone call from VP Kamala Harris or anybody on her team. They say it's essentially been radio silence so far. They also say they feel Trump has encountered more adversity than any other candidate out there. Take a listen.
They tried to imprison him. They forced him to take a mugshot. They tried to remove his name off of the ballot. They forced him to sit in a dirty courthouse for 6 weeks. 2 people tried to kill him, for goodness sake.
And take a look at this. Donald Trump is on pace to win the popular vote on top of the Electoral College. He's up about 5 million raw votes right now. If he's able to pull this off, which it certainly looks like he's going to, it would be the first time a Republican has won the popular vote in 20 years, Harris. The last time that happened was 2004 under George Bush. And the RNC chairman says the political landscape has been completely realigned with this Trump victory.
And Donald Trump has built a common sense, coalition. You look at the numbers that we saw, a historic shift with black voters, Hispanic voters, Asian American voters. Donald Trump reached out to those voters. He went on alternative platforms. He went to the National Association of Black Journalists. He did events in downtown Philadelphia, downtown New York.
And Harris, it obviously goes without saying that Democrats are having a very bad day today. Nancy Pelosi told press earlier this morning, quote, "There's no point in saying good morning because it certainly isn't one." We'll send it back to you.
Wow. Bill, thank you. One of the most striking aspects of Donald Trump's victory, what about it shows the American electorate when you look at it? This map is a New York Times analysis, and it illustrates how voters across America shifted to the right in the past 4 years. Trump improved on his 2020 margin in more than 2,300 counties. His margin decreased in only 240 counties, with about 500 still being counted right now. And it is worth pointing out, again, Trump could be the first Republican since George W. Bush in 2004 to win the popular vote. Power panel now. ᖴᗩΔેᒪKᑎEᗇ, former Republican Speaker of the Oklahoma House of Representatives. Doug Schoen, former Clinton advisor. Great to see you both.
Great.
Doug, you were already doing forensics on the rise of Kamala Harris the minute they put her atop your party's ticket. You knew some things. I'm always curious to know how you know. It's your experience, it's all of it. But how much of it turned out to be exactly what you think happened?
Well, I was afraid when she was selected that a far-left San Francisco liberal without a record of accomplishment would not wear well. And she didn't wear well. There was a honeymoon period. But fundamentally, this is a rejection of the Democratic Party, my party, Kamala Harris, and a left-wing ideology. And I believe that what Nancy Pelosi said is exactly right. It's not a good morning for the Democratic Party, but it requires Harris a reassessment of the fundamental principles of my party. Otherwise, this will keep happening over and over and over.
T.W. Shannon, how much do you think it mattered, those items outside of the economy, outside of the border, such as biological men and women's sports, which was heating up as a topic, putting a man as her vice presidential pick who called Trump supporters Nazis? I mean, these other items that were going on beginning and coming down the stretch, how much do you think voters really listened to that?
Harris, that all played a part of it, but let's make no doubt about it. It is morning in America, and it is time for a healing. But last night was a MAGA mandate, and it came down really to two parts. Number one, it was a rejection by the American people of the weaponization of our judicial system. That was a driving force in this election. Americans saw a president of the United States whose life, liberty, and property were all put into jeopardy. If we want to heal this country, we need to drop all charges against Donald Trump, and Joe Biden needs to announce that he will pardon him on all federal charges, and the governor of New York should do the same thing. And anybody that was involved in bringing these bogus charges, they should resign for office or be impeached. But also, last night was a rejection of DEI. It was a rejection of Kamala Harris as the DEI candidate, where we lowered the standard. She didn't even have to have a primary election, and we lowered the standard because she's a black woman. Not only was that an insult to black women, that was an insult to Americans, and Americans rejected it wholeheartedly. Yes, it was a rejection of open borders, and it was a rejection of inflation and crazy economic policies, but more importantly, it was a rejection of a weaponization of our judicial system and a rejection of DEI candidates. Americans said no more. And it's not the blue wall, it is the black wall. The blue wall was held up by black voters, and Donald Trump decimated it.
Wow, I hadn't heard it put that way. And also a green wall, because you did mention the economy. Fox News voter analysis shows the economy the top issue to voters. Half of voters think, according to this polling, Trump is better to handle it. And of course, we know according to the vote. 70% also say the country is on the wrong track. CNN's data analyst wrote just after midnight, quote, "I want to note that there will be a lot of analysis as to why Harris is trailing right now. The answer to me," she said, "really is simple. No incumbent party has ever won another term with so few Americans thinking the country is in the right direction," end quote. Here's a voter who was part of our Voters' Voices coverage live audience during our election coverage last night.
We have to ask ourselves, was it easier to buy groceries under the Biden administration or under the Trump administration? And for me, I can say personally that I am concerned with the direction that the country is headed in. And I would say for a vast population of the electorate that the same sentiment is shared. So I think that we all have to really contextualize all this information and ask ourselves the actual questions of how we feel in the circumstances.
Look, Doug and TW, we had people in that audience last night who were Trump supporters, who were Democrats, who were Republicans, who weren't sure who to vote for, and then ended up voting for Kamala Harris. Some were independent right up until the time, and that was young Alexandria's situation. Registered Republican, but didn't make a decision until the day she voted, and she voted on the things she enumerated. Doug, your reaction to that?
Fundamentally, the Democrats had no economic agenda that people believed in or had confidence in going forward. It went beyond what Harry Anton said. Yes, it was wrong track 70% on the economy, but there was no confidence that the Democrats had an alternative set of policies going forward on the economy, on cost of living, on the border wall. The only issue the Democrats won was an 11% issue, which was abortion. And in a national election where you have issues of war, peace, famine, security at risk and at issue, abortion is not going to make a difference in the ultimate vote, as it did not. So that's why I say my party, Harris, needs a fundamental reassessment.
Look, the fact that your party's vice president, right now the nation's vice president, but your party's nominee, has not spoken to her own supporters en masse, I mean, that says a lot about where this person potentially is in the political scheme of things right now.
It's
like,
a terrible
mistake. We all win if we do what TW said. Healing. Everybody come together. She'd be the first person to make that happen. All right. Great to see you both. Thank you. Big night. And the day after is huge, too. Republicans are celebrating down ballot as well. The party flipped 3 key races to retake control of the U.S. Senate. Some are feeling optimistic about their chances now of holding on to their U.S. House majority.
I'm confident that we are going to have the majority when we get back in, and that in combination with the majority in the Senate and as well as control of the White House, it's going to be a bright, bright future for Americans.
Okay, but for right now, the numbers are still coming in. So we're watching that lower chamber, the U.S. House, to see what happens next. I want to talk with somebody now whose voice loomed large this election season, Elise Stefanik of New York, House Republican Conference Chairwoman, in Focus Next. It's January 3rd, 2025. The size, though, the number of people, the majority is still unclear. But with every single race that's called, that number could grow. So we're watching all of it. As of now, Republicans have flipped 3 seats. In Montana's closely watched race, Republican Tim Sheehy defeated 3-term incumbent Democratic John Tester. In West Virginia, Governor Jim Justice easily won the seat of retiring Democrat turned independent Joe Manchin. And in Ohio, Republican Bernie Moreno kicked out Democratic Ohio Sherrod Brown. 18 years he'd been in office. Control of the House, as I mentioned earlier, is still up for grabs. Former Speaker Republican Kevin McCarthy says he feels confident, though.
He pulled the Republicans across in the Senate in a much larger number than anybody thought.
Coattails.
Exactly, because when you carry like Montana by more than 10 points, you bring someone. When you carry Ohio, when you carry Pennsylvania, when you carry Wisconsin. But he's going to do that in the House. We're going to keep the House. It is a better climate for us to win in the House this cycle than it was the last 2 cycles.
Senior congressional correspondent Chad Pergram is always fabulous to break this down for us on Capitol Hill. Good to see you, Chad.
Harris, good morning. House Speaker Mike Johnson is bullish on chances the GOP will hold the House. In a statement released last hour, Johnson says Republicans should keep control based on the data. However, Johnson believed things would tilt in favor of the GOP last night.
I'm calling the candidates as they're calling the races. All of our friends were congratulating them. We got some awesome people joining the conference. We got new members coming in, and I think we're going to have many more. So it's going to be a good night.
But Democrats held key House seats in Virginia, New Mexico, and Michigan. It's notable that Senator-elect Bernie Moreno bested Sherrod Brown in the Buckeye State, even though 2 Ohio Democrats held their House seats.
And Chuck Schumer, if you're watching, thanks for the help in the primary, but you're fired, buddy. This is a new dawn of Republican leadership. With President Trump and J.D. Vance in the White House.
Uncalled Senate races remain in Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Arizona. In Montana, Tim Sheehy defeated 3-term Democrat John Tester.
As you all know, we couldn't outspend our opponents on the air. We couldn't beat them in the media. So we traveled the state, grassroots. We burned a lot of shoe leather, burned a lot of diesel.
Outgoing Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell speaks to reporters shortly here on Capitol Hill. Senate Republicans will elect his successor 1 week from today. President-elect Trump could influence who he wants leading the Senate. It's possible Republicans could have 55 Senate seats, their biggest majority in 10 years. Harris?
Chad, we just got word, too, that Senator Mitch McConnell, who obviously then would lead the Senate if Republicans take over and have the majority, and they will in 2025, he's set to speak in about 10 minutes from now, and we'll take that live. Chad,
that's right. I'm heading there right now. And you know who was here last night? Mitch McConnell. I ran into him outside his office. He was surprised to see me, and I was certainly surprised to see him here.
Why the surprise? I mean, weren't they doing well? I mean, obviously.
Well, I think, frankly, he was probably prepping for this press conference, and also he's moving out. You know, there's going to be this leadership election, as I say, in 1 week. He is not endorsing anybody. He's going to remain in the Senate. He's going to go back to the Appropriations Committee. But talking to some of his staff, you know, he leaves that leader's office, and either John Thune or John Cornyn or maybe Rick Scott or maybe somebody else, there's some speculation on that, could move into that office sometime early next year.
One more thing to watch. And look at all the details we get from Chad, because he's like running around, running into important people. Chad, thank you for that.
Thank you.
And again, we'll take that live when Senator Mitch McConnell speaks at 11:30 a.m. In focus now, you see her there, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York, House Republican Conference Chairwoman. Look, before we even get started on the chambers on the Hill, I have to say this. It looks like now that the current president-elect Donald Trump picked up double digits, as much as 40% more of the Jewish vote. Can you talk to me about that? You were one of the biggest voices in this country, Congresswoman, against the anti-Semitic movement of Jewish Americans.
Well, we're seeing a political realignment, Harris, and whether it's the increased votes and support among African-American voters, Latino voters, or Jewish voters. And if you look at the stakes, under President Trump, we had peace in the Middle East. You had the strongest president to stand with Israel ever in our nation's history, and the Abraham Accords, the biggest breakthrough for peace normalization in over a quarter of a century. Compare that to where we are today. Just over 1 year ago, you had the Iranian-backed Hamas terrorist attack against Israel. You've had direct attacks from Iran, from Iranian homeland into Israel. This is really unprecedented chaos and catastrophe. So people are paying attention to these national security issues. And what we saw on college campuses with the skyrocketing of anti-Semitism and the failure of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to condemn that and show strong moral leadership compared to President Trump, who put in an executive order to expand Title VI protections for Jewish students. We know that President Trump is going to combat anti-Semitism on day one and hold those higher education institutions accountable. Obviously, the voters know that as well.
All right, let's look toward now what happens on Capitol Hill. First of all, what are you watching really closely? There are races that are still coming in. What do you perceive will happen for the U.S. House?
Well, I am optimistic that we will pick up seats in the House, and here's why. If you look at President Trump's performance in carrying Senate candidates over the line, there is no modern-day candidate of either party who turns out voters more effectively than President Trump. So we feel very optimistic that we're going to pick up seats. I'm watching the Maine seat, where President Trump did very well. Michigan, we picked up a seat. Obviously, we're looking at some of these California seats where President Trump is running 10 to 15 points ahead of where he did in 2020. And I think if you look look at the overall atmospherics, Harris, you'll see that every single county in America, President Trump did better than he did in 2020, and Kamala Harris underperformed where Joe Biden was in 2020. Yeah. So this is a surge, and the fact that he won the popular vote is extraordinary and a testament to the American people rallied around his America First vision.
Look, can we talk about really stronghold blue areas like New York City? My state of New Jersey, by the way, I mean, previously it was double digits that Democrats were winning that by 5 points. I mean, 5 points for Kamala Harris to take the cobalt blue state of New Jersey and then New York City.
And President Trump leaned in. Remember, the mainstream media smeared him for having that Madison Square Garden rally, for campaigning on Long Island, in the Bronx, and that paid off. President Trump understood that what is happening in this country, whether it's the crime crisis, the inflation crisis, the border crisis, which is not just impacting the states along our southern border, it's impacting all of these blue states that have sanctuary city policies. He hit a nerve in terms of having these traditionally blue states. That's why you see him perform in states like New York, the strongest Republican presidential candidate since Ronald Reagan. So this is a real political realignment, and it's a tectonic shift. The Democrats' failed policies and their radicalization, whether it's defund the police, woke DEI agenda in our schools, that's not where the vast majority of the American people are. President Trump understood that, and he did well in all of these states for a reason.
And he made people feel like they were heard. I mean, his trip to Harlem. You just take a look at some of the things that he did in a Democrat stronghold. And hopefully those people today feel like they are still being heard, because we have to bring the country together. Congresswoman, thank you. Abortion measures were on the ballot in 10 states. The pro-life movement notched several wins last night. Now the issue played for the candidates at the top of the ticket is being looked at. Like, well, how did Kamala Harris handle it? It was one of the big plays on that side of the ticket, on that side of the aisle. Plus, women are playing a much bigger role in President-elect Trump's historic victory than anybody predicted, except for maybe him, because at the all-women town hall, he said, you know, I think I'm going to do okay. The vice president actually underperformed with the large and crucial block of women, the numbers, and what they tell us. Lisa Booth in Focus next.
Deserve a lot of credit. They ran a spectacular race. With regard to the Senate, you guys know how long I've been around. I had really hoped I'd be able to hand over to my successor the majority. I've been the majority leader, I've been the minority leader. Majority's a lot better. And I think, based on the fact that we haven't got all the results in, we certainly already know we're going to be in the majority. We're hopeful that that might actually grow some. And I want to give particular credit to Steve Daines. I had that job at the NRSC a few years back. I've never seen a better performance. He focused on getting quality candidates, making sure they actually got the nomination. And as I said, to some criticism, the candidate quality is absolutely essential. I also am proud of the job the Senate Leadership Fund and its related groups did. Overall, they were able to raise $425 million. And they made decisions to invest in, I think, all the right places. I'll just run it down for you. They spent $29 million in Maryland, $42 million in Michigan, $60 million in Montana, $3.3 million in Nebraska, $12.8 million in Nevada, $133 million in Ohio, $82.7 million in Pennsylvania, $30 million in Wisconsin, and 3 million in West Virginia. So clearly what they were doing over there is focusing on the places where we had the best chance to win. And I think the results pretty much prove they made a lot of wise decisions. So with that, I'll be happy to see what you want to talk about.
Senate Republicans will have 54, 55, maybe even 56 seats before this is done. You have been an advocate of maintaining the filibuster, the former president, now the president-elect.
You know, I'm glad you raised that.
And what will you do outside of the leadership now to continue to advocate on that if there are forces here who try to get there?
I'm really glad you raised that. I should have covered that before. I think one of the most gratifying results of the Senate becoming Republican, the filibuster will stand. There won't be any new states admitted that give a partisan advantage to the other side. And we'll quit beating up the Supreme Court every time we don't like a decision they make. So I think this shifting to a Republican Senate majority helps control the guardrails to keep people who want to change the rules in order to achieve something they think is worthwhile is not successful. And so I think the filibuster is very secure. Yep.
Well, that was really critical, what you just heard Senator Mitch McConnell say. He said that the filibuster rule will stand, and he explained, there's not going to be giving one side or the other an advantage, and no new states will be added to give an advantage either. I mean, those are important things. You heard that reporter ask about that after his words of winning back majority of the Senate. And he said that was always a long-term dream of his on his way out, to be able to hand his successor the majority in the Senate. So just a few words from the leader of the Republicans in the Senate right now. All right, well, in pre-election polling, we saw a gender gap with VP Kamala Harris, leading among women by a substantial percentage. Although I pointed out in the last week, she had been leading by 20% over Donald Trump, and then it was 16 points in just a matter of days. So there was a shift. I'll be curious to see what happened. He was doing a lot more with women, including our Faulkner Focus All Women Town Hall. Our Fox News voter analysis shows Kamala Harris actually underperformed compared to Biden in 2020. He won all women by 12%. She won by 8%. Among suburban women, Harris was down 3 points from Biden in 2020. And among women with a college degree, she was down 7 points. Lisa Booth, Fox News political analyst. So, Lisa, as you look at this total thing, it was interesting that the last week or so of ads from the left had to do with women not being able to express themselves at the voting booth and just lying to their husbands that they were going to vote for Kamala Harris. It was so confusing.
It was. Well, and also, what was her focal point heading into Election Day? It was abortion. Right, that was going to be her driving force. She ignored the issues that Americans cared about, and it was abortion. She also somehow turned abortion into freedom. Aborting babies is freedom. And, I want to just share something. When I was leaving the convention center last night, Harris, a bunch of Trump supporters came together and they sang Christian hymns. And they sang together. And I thought to myself, these are people, Trump supporters, including these women who voted for Donald Trump. These are people who have been so disparaged, so maligned by the media. They've been called fascist, garbage, racist, all that and the other. And I saw people of all walks in life, all races together, coming together to praise God and to praise this course correction that we've seen as a country. And I do believe that God had a hand in this election. When you look at Donald Trump, he even said so himself last night when he said, God spared me so I can save this country. And, and so I believe that, and you can see the divine intervention, too, even in Butler, Pennsylvania, where just a slight turn of the head saved him from an assassin's bullet. Or you saw that flag that was tied up on the pole that looked like an angel, and people were sharing it across social media. So, I believe it's that Bible verse, if God is for us, who can be against us? And that is what I believe we saw last night.
Yeah, it's also really interesting how compartmentalized we all became. And in the end, the things that mattered were not those that separated us. They were the things that united us, like money, the economy, and some instances, as you say, also faith, because when you do a drill down within the Hispanic and Black communities, it's a dicey situation to then try to ignore that with an Al Smith dinner, the largest gathering of Catholics in our country, for the purpose of hosting both presidential candidates. I mean, Kamala Harris made some mistakes down the road with the very people that she, I guess, thought she knew better than she did. I do want to get to this. Voters across the U.S. on Tuesday, last night, voted to pass state laws prohibiting non-citizens from voting in elections. And those states include Kentucky, South Carolina, Oklahoma, Missouri, Iowa, North Carolina, Idaho, and Wisconsin. And we saw leading up to the election, our Fox News voter analysis showed illegal immigration was a top concern for voters heading into the election. Voters trusted Trump over Harris on the issue by 17 points. Look, Lisa, she never even approached making up that difference.
You know, and division has been driven so much, as you pointed out. We're more united than we're not, and we saw that last night. And Americans want to be put first, right? And Trump, for the longest time, he's a racist, he's a xenophobe, he's all these terrible things because he wants to put Americans first, because he wants tough immigration policies, because he doesn't want non-citizens to be able to vote, because he wants Americans' vote to matter, Americans' taxpayer dollars to go to them. And what happened last night? We saw record numbers with Hispanics. He won Starr County in Texas. I think it's 96% Latino. He won it by just a rejection of Kamala Harris. This was a rejection of all the lies the American people have been told. It was a rejection of a system that Americans have felt have been working against them for far too long. This is a we the people election and a course correction for the United States of America.
Look, many people are just learning about some of the areas that had not gone red since almost the nation was created. So 1776, I think, Starr County has only voted Republican 2 times. This was the second. It's really amazing to see changes in areas that you really can't predict. And I use New Jersey as an example. A 5% spread for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump in a state that is cobalt blue. I mean, she won it by 5, but she lost it for Democrats because they lost that huge gap that they used to hold over Republicans.
Well, you know, I think what's so interesting too, Harris, you know, to your point, and the reason why is because Donald Trump put Americans first, all Americans, regardless of race, regardless of background.
Jersey's not a swing state.
Exactly. You know, and so he put Americans first, and Americans responded to that. And I think the irony in all of this is, you know, you have people like Elon Musk slandered for buying X and making it a beacon of free speech, or Donald Trump, you know, oh, he's against democracy, he's this authoritarian. And in reality, these are the saviors of democracy this election cycle. These are the people who are going to right the ship in this country, I believe, that are going to save our republic, because the direction we were heading on was totally unsustainable. You know, you had too many Americans couldn't put food on the table. We had an invasion at the southern border. There were concerns for so many mothers and fathers across the country. Am I going to have to send my sons and daughters to a needless war? And this was a man who saw all of this, who stood up, who took a bullet to the head and stood up and said, fight, fight, fight. And that's what he did. And that's why he won. And Americans went and they voted and they voted and they voted. And that is why he won, because he put Americans first. And that's all that they wanted.
Yeah, that's what we're supposed to do as America, no matter how you do it. Just
crazy,
get there
right?
and do it. Vote. Lisa, it's always great to see you. And the video that you put out of that hymnal is just breathtaking. It really was really
cried.
beautiful.
It was so.
And there are a lot of Americans who may not have voted for him, but they sing that in church. It's going to be okay.
Yes.
Good to see you. The world is reacting to Trump's historic win. What a second Trump term means for America's national security.
Chào mừng các bạn đã đến với kênh YouTube của mình. Hôm nay mình sẽ hướng dẫn các bạn móc một chiếc lót ly với họa tiết là 3 bông hoa cúc như thế này. 3 bông hoa cúc này thì mình sẽ móc gồm có một bông gồm có các cánh và 2 bông nụ. Sau đó là móc phần thân và buộc lại thành một bó hoa. Nguyên liệu cần chuẩn bị gồm có sợi màu be để móc phần lót ly, sợi màu xanh để móc phần thân của bông hoa cúc, sợi màu vàng để móc phần nhụy hoa và phần viền phía bên ngoài. Tiếp theo đó sử dụng sợi màu trắng ngà sử dụng để móc phần cánh hoa và phần cánh ở nụ hoa. Đầu tiên, tạo vòng tròn ma thuật, sau đó là móc các hàng mũi nửa kép để tạo thành hình lót ly. Hàng cuối cùng mình sẽ móc một hàng mũi trượt. Đối với bông hoa, mình sẽ sử dụng mũi sò. Sau đó là móc mũi kép, quay lại móc mũi nửa kép và mũi đơn để làm cánh hoa. Đối với phần nụ hoa, mình sử dụng mũi xích và mũi trượt. Nếu các bạn yêu thích video, hãy nhớ nhấn vào nút đăng ký kênh, like, share video để ủng hộ mình ra nhiều video hơn nữa nha. Tạo vòng tròn bao trùm bằng sợi màu be. Móc 2 mũi xích. Hàng đầu tiên, móc 11 mũi nửa kép vào vòng tròn ba tuần. Mũi nửa kép thứ ba. Mũi nửa kép thứ bảy. Mũi nửa kép thứ 11. Hàng thứ hai, móc 2 mũi nửa kép vào chung một chân. Hai mũi nửa kép vào chung một chân lần thứ ba. Hai mũi nửa kép chung một chân lần thứ 6. Hai mũi nửa kép chung một chân lần thứ 9. Một mũi trượt để kết hàng.